Once upon a time, in a palace full of secrets, there was a man with no power, just a voice. This is the story of Ebed Melech, the man who risked everything to do one right thing. And God saw him. The water dripped steadily from the stone ceiling above, falling into a mossy puddle near Ebed Melech's sandals. The underground garden beneath the palace was quiet, damp, and hidden, a place no one cared about. That's why he liked it. Ebed Melech sat cross-legged on a patch of grass, humming softly to himself as he trimmed a crooked vine with a dull knife. He was a servant, a foreigner, an Ethiopian with no family in the city, no voice in the courts. His job was simple: tend the corners of the palace no one else wanted to touch. But he heard things, all the time. Voices above the garden would drift down from the palace windows, nobles whispering, guards arguing, priests pretending to be holy while planning dirty things. That day he heard a name again: Jeremiah. He paused. The vine he'd been trimming dropped from his fingers. The voices were sharp, angry. Enough of that prophet's talk. He's weakening the soldiers. He should be silenced before the people start listening. Ebed Melech stood up, slowly. He knew about Jeremiah, the man who spoke what no one wanted to hear, the man who said the city would fall if they didn't repent, the man who wasn't afraid to call the king out for his sins, and now they wanted him gone. Ebed Melech glanced up toward the narrow shaft of sunlight above. His heart thudded hard in his chest. "Are they going to kill him?" he whispered. He paced the garden floor, shoes splashing through shallow water. "They wouldn't," he muttered. "Would they?" But something in his stomach twisted. He dropped the knife. The vine could wait. There were louder things growing now: fear, and the feeling that if he stayed quiet, he'd be no better than the men plotting above. He took a deep breath, eyes on the shaft of light. Time to leave the garden. The stone steps out of the garden were slick and steep. Ebed Melech climbed them slowly, one hand on the wall for balance, the other gripping the edge of his robe. He hadn't been up this way in weeks. He usually took the servants' corridor, quiet and unseen. But not today. Today, he needed to be seen. His legs burned as he climbed higher, past damp walls and echoing arches until the smell of earth gave way to burning oil and perfume. He emerged into a narrow hallway lined with tall columns and glowing lamps. Guards stood in iron armor, spears resting against their shoulders, eyes blank like stone. None of them looked at him. He was just the Ethiopian servant, a shadow with a broom. He turned down another hall, then another, each one grander, louder. The sound of court life crept in, sandals slapping the floor, jewels clinking, gossip rising like smoke. But Ebed Melech didn't stop. He passed the kitchens, past the royal scribes, past the polished mirrors where princes liked to admire themselves. His sandals squeaked now, his palms sweated. And still, he didn't stop. Then, at the end of a long corridor lined with crimson curtains stood a bronze door. The throne room. He could hear voices inside, low, disagreeing. And above them all, the soft, uncertain voice of the king. Zedekiah. Ebed Melech's heart pounded. He stepped toward the guards at the door. One of them raised an eyebrow. "What do you want?" Ebed Melech straightened his back. "I need to speak to the king. It's about the prophet Jeremiah." The guard snorted. "You? Speak to the king?" "I won't shout. I won't cause trouble, but it's urgent. Please." They glanced at each other. Then slowly, the door opened. Ebed Melech stepped into the golden chamber. Light spilled through stained glass windows. Carvings of lions and vines wrapped around the pillars. The king sat at the far end on a throne of dark wood, his crown tilted slightly, his robes too big, as if he was still trying to grow into them. Zedekiah looked up, saw Ebed Melech, and blinked, surprised. "You—" Ebed Melech bowed low. "Forgive me, my king. I know I'm only a servant, but I heard what they've done to Jeremiah." Zedekiah sat forward slowly. "You heard?" Ebed Melech nodded. "They've thrown him into a cistern, a dry well. He'll die there." The room went quiet. A noble at the king's right frowned. "That's not your concern, foreigner." But Zedekiah held up a hand. "What would you have me do?" he asked. Ebed Melech's voice didn't shake. "Let me rescue him." Now the whole room stirred. "Rescue a prophet?" someone muttered. "He's already condemned." "He's a traitor." Ebed Melech stood taller. "He's a man of God, and God is watching." Zedekiah looked at him for a long moment, and then he nodded. "Take 30 men, the king said, "and do what you must." Ebed Melech bowed again, this time deeper. Then he turned and walked out of the throne room with fire in his chest. He didn't have a crown. He didn't have power. But now he had permission, and he would not waste it. The ropes burned against Ebed Melech's palms as he pulled them from the storage shed. He moved fast, his sandals slapping against the palace floor, breath short. 30 men followed behind him in a tight cluster, their armor clinking with every step. Most of them didn't know why they were going. One of them finally asked, "Why are we risking our necks for a prophet in a hole?" Ebed Melech didn't turn around. "Because he's still breathing, and God hasn't stopped watching." They reached the edge of the courtyard where the old prison cistern sat, hidden, sealed, and almost forgotten. It had once been used to store water. Now it was used to bury voices. The stone well was tall and cracked, its rim covered in vines. Ebed Melech dropped to his knees and peered inside. Darkness. Silence. He cupped his hands and shouted down, "Jeremiah! Are you alive?" No answer. His stomach twisted. He turned to one of the younger soldiers. "Bring rags, old cloth, anything soft." The soldier blinked. "Why?" "To pad the ropes," Ebed Melech said. "The prophet is weak. We can't drag him up like a sack of grain." Moments later they returned with torn fabric ripped from cast-off tunics and worn-out sleeves. Ebed Melech tied them around the ends of the rope. Then he looked into the pit again. "Jeremiah!" he shouted. "If you can hear me, tie the ropes under your arms." Still silence. But then, faint movement. A cough. A moan. And finally, a voice, raw and low. "I hear you." Relief hit Ebed Melech like a wave. He dropped the rope down carefully, praying under his breath. "Please, God, let his arms still work." There was a pause, then a gentle tug. "He has it!" Ebed Melech shouted. "Lift, slowly." The 30 men leaned back and pulled, inch by inch. The rope groaned. Mud dripped down the stones. Ebed Melech knelt beside the edge, hands ready. And then Jeremiah appeared, half covered in filth, eyes sunken, skin pale, but alive. Ebed Melech reached down and grabbed his shoulders. "You're safe now," he whispered. Jeremiah blinked up at him, squinting through the sunlight. You pulled me out." Ebed Melech nodded. "I heard. I saw. I couldn't stay quiet." Jeremiah managed the smallest smile. "Then God saw you too." Jeremiah sat in the shade, his back propped against the palace wall, drinking water from a clay cup with both trembling hands. Ebed Melech knelt beside him, wiping mud off the prophet's tunic with a strip of cloth. "Are you in pain?" he asked. Jeremiah coughed. "Not from the mud, just from what's coming." Ebed Melech frowned. "You're safe now." Jeremiah looked at him with tired eyes. No one is safe when they refuse to listen to God. There was silence between them. In the distance, the sounds of the city drifted through the air, children laughing, vendors calling, soldiers drilling. But none of it sounded steady. It all felt like something built on thin ice, ready to crack. "You still believe Jerusalem will fall?" Ebed Melech asked quietly. "I don't believe it," Jeremiah said. "I know it. The Babylonians are coming. The walls won't hold. The king won't obey. And when it all collapses, only those who trust the Lord will stand." Ebed Melech looked down at his hands. He had used those hands to garden, to polish palace floors, to tie knots in ropes, and now to save a prophet. He didn't feel brave. He felt small. "What should I do?" he asked. Jeremiah studied him. "You've already done the hardest thing," he said. "You spoke up when others stayed silent." Ebed Melech shook his head. "And yet the people who threw you in the cistern still walk the halls like kings." Jeremiah smiled faintly. "For now." Then he leaned forward and whispered, "God sees what's done in secret, and he will not forget the one who stood for truth when everyone else was afraid." Ebed Melech swallowed hard. "I don't need to be remembered," he said. "You already are," Jeremiah replied. Just then, footsteps echoed down the corridor. A palace servant appeared. "The king wants the prophet returned to the courtyard guard room." Ebed Melech stood. "He needs rest." The servant shrugged. "I don't make the rules." Ebed Melech looked at Jeremiah. The prophet nodded. "I'll be fine." Ebed Melech helped him to his feet. And as they walked back through the halls, past men who had ordered Jeremiah's death, past soldiers who looked away, past nobles who smiled too wide, Ebed Melech felt something stirring in his chest. Not fear, not pride, but fire. Because now he wasn't just saving Jeremiah's life. He was carrying his words. The next morning, the sky looked wrong. Not stormy, not dark. Just off. Ebed Melech stood in the palace courtyard, broom in hand, but not sweeping. His eyes were fixed on the eastern horizon, where a thin line of dust shimmered like a warning. Soldiers marched faster than usual, servants spoke in low voices, nobles stayed inside. And the king didn't come out of his chamber at all. Ebed Melech walked through the outer corridors, past tall marble walls and golden pillars, past carvings of lions and eagles that once felt strong. Now they looked like decorations on a sinking ship. He found a group of guards whispering by the gate. "Scouts saw them," one said. "The Babylonians, hundreds of them." "Thousands," said another, "coming from the north. They say they've surrounded the city already." Ebed Melech stepped closer. "Is it true?" One of the guards glanced at him. "Why do you care, gardener?" "I care," he said, "because I live here too." The guards shifted. One muttered, "The king will figure something out." Ebed Melech turned away, but his heart beat faster. Later, in the hallway near the guardroom, he passed a servant carrying bread to the prophet Jeremiah. The servant paused and said quietly, "He's not eating much. Keeps praying, keeps warning." Ebed Melech nodded, then changed direction. He made his way to the small, guarded courtyard where Jeremiah sat beneath a fig tree, ankles shackled but face calm. The prophet looked up as Ebed Melech approached. "You feel it, don't you?" Jeremiah asked. Ebed Melech sat beside him. "Yes." Jeremiah looked toward the sky. "The king still thinks he can make a deal. He won't surrender. He's hoping God changes his mind." "Will he?" Ebed Melech asked. Jeremiah shook his head. "God already gave him a way out. He ignored it." They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Jeremiah turned to Ebed Melech. "You don't have to stay," he said. Ebed Melech blinked. "What?" "When the gates fall, the palace will burn first. The people closest to the king will suffer the most. You saved me, Ebed Melech, but you can't save this city." Ebed Melech's throat tightened. "This is my home now," he said. "Where would I go?" "Trust the Lord," Jeremiah replied. "Not the walls, not the kings, not the titles." Ebed Melech looked up at the marble towers. They'd once seemed so tall, but now they looked hollow. "Will he protect me?" he asked. Jeremiah smiled faintly. "He already is." Ebed Melech stood slowly. The sky hadn't changed. But something inside him had. He didn't know what tomorrow would look like. But he knew who he'd listen to. No warning. No trumpet. Just a sound like thunder tearing the sky in half. Ebed Melech ran to the edge of the courtyard as the ground shuddered beneath his feet. He wasn't alone. Soldiers, scribes, cooks, and slaves all froze at once, heads tilted toward the city gate. Another sound, closer this time. Not thunder. Stone. Breaking. Ebed Melech turned just in time to see one of the eastern towers, once proud and polished, tilt, groan, and collapse in a cloud of choking dust. A scream rose from the lower courtyard. Another. Then chaos. People fled from every corridor. Servants ran barefoot. Noblemen threw off their robes. A general barked orders that no one followed. The palace was unraveling. But Ebed Melech didn't run. He moved fast. Not toward the exit, but toward the courtyard where Jeremiah had been chained beneath the fig tree. When he got there, the guard post was abandoned. The chains unlocked, and the prophet gone. Ebed Melech stood still, heart thudding. "Where are you?" he whispered. Then he saw it, a scrap of cloth, torn, stuffed into the gap of a cracked wall, marked with charcoal, just a symbol, a circle with a line through it. The mark Jeremiah had once drawn in the dirt when they'd spoken about truth, cutting through lies. Ebed Melech turned and ran, down the corridor, past the bronze doors, past gold statues now crooked and cracked, out into the lower city. Smoke rose in the distance. The Babylonian army had breached the far wall. Horses galloped through alleyways. Battering rams slammed into outer gates. People screamed and scattered, but Ebed Melech moved through them like a man on a mission. He passed his old garden entrance, the shaft of sunlight still falling across the mossy stones. For a split second, he considered diving back down into safety. He didn't. Instead, he headed for the alley near the water channel, an old escape route used by palace servants in times of siege. He slipped through. And there, under the cover of overgrown reeds and stone ruins, stood Jeremiah, alive, waiting. "Come," the prophet said. "The Lord told me you'd choose the narrow way." Ebed Melech joined him, breathless. Behind them, the city roared. But ahead? A dusty road, quiet and open. "Where does this lead?" Ebed Melech asked. Jeremiah looked forward. "To exile, but not destruction. To sorrow, but not silence." Ebed Melech nodded. "I'll walk it." And the two of them vanished into the wilderness. No weapons, no riches, no crown. Just faith and the God who saw them. The road behind them smoldered. Dust clung to Ebed Melech's robe. His sandals were worn. His throat was dry, but he didn't ask to stop. He walked beside Jeremiah, quiet. Every once in a while, he glanced back at the city, at what used to be Jerusalem. Once golden, now gray. They found shelter that night in the hollow of a hillside just above a stream that still trickled despite the war. Jeremiah built a small fire. Ebed Melech sat across from him, arms around his knees. They hadn't spoken much, not since the fall. Finally, Jeremiah broke the silence. "I saw the king." Ebed Melech looked up. Jeremiah nodded. Zedekiah tried to flee through the garden gate with his sons and guards. The Babylonians caught them before sunrise. Ebed Melech closed his eyes. "Did they—" "They made him watch," Jeremiah said softly. "His sons were executed. Then they blinded him." Silence fell between them like a stone dropped in a well. "He didn't listen," Jeremiah added, "even when God gave him a way out." Ebed Melech stared at the fire. "So, that's it? All of it? Gone?" "No," Jeremiah said. He reached into the folds of his robe and pulled out a tiny roll of parchment sealed in wax. "This message is for you." Ebed Melech blinked. "For me?" Jeremiah handed it over. "I didn't write it," he said. "The Lord did." Ebed Melech held the scroll with shaking fingers. He broke the seal and read aloud in a quiet voice. "Ebed Melech, the Cushite, because you trusted in me, I will rescue you. You will not fall by the sword. You will escape with your life, because you have put your trust in me." He stopped reading. His throat tightened. He looked up. Jeremiah's eyes glowed in the firelight. "You were never invisible to him." Ebed Melech looked back down at the scroll. He had no home, no title, no city to return to, but somehow he had peace. Because God had seen him, not when he was strong, not when he was loud, but when he whispered up a prayer and tied knots in a rope to save a prophet. And now, in a world full of burned palaces and fallen kings, God had spoken his name. A servant's name. Ebed Melech closed the scroll gently and whispered, "That's enough for me." The days blurred into one another. Morning, dust, silence. Evening, stars. No more palace, no more garden. No throne to sweep under, no ropes to carry, no voice echoing down from golden halls, just dirt paths and dry bread, firelight and faith. Jeremiah and Ebed Melech walked quietly most days. Sometimes they met villagers, scared, hungry, grieving. Other times, They walked through silence so deep even the birds seemed unsure if they should sing. But there was something peaceful in it too. No guards watching him now, no nobles sneering, just sky and space and scripture. One morning, Ebed Melech and Jeremiah came upon a broken caravan, families fleeing the city, their carts splintered, their donkeys thin and shaking. A little girl sat in the dust, holding a clay doll with one arm missing. Her mother stood nearby, rocking a baby and crying without sound. Ebed Melech approached slowly. "Do you need water?" The woman nodded. Ebed Melech knelt, pulled a flask from his robe and handed it over. The little girl stared at him, wide-eyed. "You're not a soldier," she whispered. He smiled. "No. You look like you used to be important." He chuckled. "I used to scrub floors under gold ceilings. Now I carry water between trees." The girl smiled back, then reached out and gave him the doll with the missing arm. "For you," she said. Ebed Melech blinked, surprised. "I can't take this." "You helped," she replied. "That's what important people do." He took the doll slowly, gently. Jeremiah approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "This is how we rebuild," he said. "Not with stone, with kindness." That night, they sat under a fig tree beside a small stream. The moon was bright. Ebed Melech held the clay doll in one hand and the scroll in the other. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think God's voice came with thunder." Jeremiah looked up. "And now?" "I think it sounds more like this," he said. "A whisper, a promise, a name spoken once and remembered forever." Jeremiah nodded. Faith isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks beside you and waits. Ebed Melech leaned back against the tree. He had no riches, no title, no statue, but somehow he'd never felt more grounded because he wasn't walking by power, he was walking by promise. The refugee camp stretched like a quilt across the valley, patched together with tents, broken carts, and scraps of old Jerusalem walls. Ebed Melech walked through it at sunrise, carrying a satchel filled with figs, herbs, and clean water. The people had nothing, but they still had each other. He stopped beside an old man trying to rewrap a bandage around his knee. The cloth was too short. His hands trembled. Ebed Melech knelt beside him. "Let me help." The man nodded, eyes tired. Ebed Melech worked quietly, retying the bandage, adding a bit of oil to soothe the skin. The man sighed with relief. "Were you a healer in the city?" the old man asked. Ebed Melech shook his head. "I was a servant." The old man squinted. "You don't talk like one." Ebed Melech smiled. "That's because I met a prophet and a God who listens." He moved on. A little farther down the path, a group of children sat in the dirt, trying to build something out of sticks and broken pottery. One girl was crying. Her roof had collapsed in the night. Rain had soaked her blankets. She held them, shivering. Ebed Melech crouched beside her and peeled off his outer robe. "Here," he said. "It's not fancy, but it's dry." The girl blinked up at him. "Why would you give me this?" He shrugged. "Because I still remember what it felt like to be cold and forgotten." She wrapped herself in it and smiled. Not wide, but real. Later that day, Jeremiah found him standing near the fire pit, cooking lentils in a cracked clay pot. "You've changed," the prophet said. Ebed Melech stirred the pot. I haven't changed. I've just finally been put in the right place. Jeremiah sat beside him. You were brave in the palace. You spoke truth when no one else would. I thought that was strength, Ebed Melech said. But now I think strength looks like this. He handed Jeremiah a bowl. Strength is listening when someone cries. He handed a second bowl to a child. Strength is giving when you have little. Then he sat down with his own bowl. Strength is staying soft in a world that wants you to go hard. Jeremiah nodded. And the world needs men like you. Ebed Melech looked out at the camp, at the tents, at the smoke curling into the sunset. No, he said. The world needs truth. I'm just here to carry it. He took a bite. The food wasn't much, but it was warm, and for now, that was enough. The sky was silver the next morning. Clouds hung low like curtains pulled across the heavens, but the camp was already awake. Pots clanged, voices murmured, and children ran barefoot through the grass. Ebed Melech stood near the fire pit, cleaning a pot with river sand, when two men approached. One was a shepherd with a limp. The other, a former palace cook. They looked nervous. Can we speak with you? The shepherd asked. Ebed Melech wiped his hands. Of course. The cook looked around. People are asking questions. They want to know what's next. If we stay here, if we move, if we follow the others who fled to Egypt. And they're asking me? Ebed Melech said, surprised. The shepherd nodded. You helped us. You didn't run. You speak with the prophet. People trust that. Ebed Melech leaned against a tree, rubbing his chin. I was just a servant, he said. I trimmed vines. I carried ropes. I'm not a leader. The cook shrugged. Maybe that's what makes you one. They left him with those words. Ebed Melech sat for a long time under that tree. A leader? He had spent most of his life doing what he was told, silent in the shadows. Now people were watching him, waiting for direction. He didn't want power, but he didn't want to let them drift either. That evening he found Jeremiah near the edge of the valley, staring out at the setting sun. They want me to lead, Ebed Melech said. Jeremiah didn't turn. So, lead. I don't have a plan, Ebed Melech said. I don't even know where we're going. You know who you're following, the prophet replied. That's more than most. Ebed Melech sat beside him. I'm not a king. I'm not wise. I'm not strong. Jeremiah smiled faintly. Neither was Moses at first. They sat together in silence, the orange light painting their faces. Then Jeremiah pulled something from his robe, a piece of parchment. I wrote this down after the fall, he said. The Lord gave it to me, for the people. Ebed Melech unrolled it slowly. I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a future and a hope. Ebed Melech read it again, then again. Future, hope. Two words that hadn't felt real in a long time. He stood up. I won't stand above them, he said, but I'll walk ahead, and I'll tell them what I've seen, what I know. Jeremiah nodded. That's what a real leader does. Ebed Melech looked back at the camp, at the tents, the fires, the quiet voices. They didn't need a crown, they needed courage. And he could offer that, one step at a time. They didn't crown him. They didn't lift him on their shoulders or carve his name into stone, but slowly, people began to follow. not with trumpets, not with banners, but with quiet eyes, watching the way he moved, listening to the way he spoke. Because when the kingdom crumbled, Ebed Melech didn't. He stayed upright. Not because he had strength, but because he had faith. It started one morning near the river, where a group of families were arguing over a patch of land. "This space belongs to my father's house," one man shouted. "My children need it for water." Another fired back. The voices rose. The crowd swelled. It could have turned violent. But Ebed Melech stepped between them, palms open. "We're in exile," he said gently. "None of us owns anything out here, but all of us are trying to live." Silence. He turned to the younger man. "If you were thirsty, would you want your child turned away?" "No." He turned to the elder. "And would you want your father's name remembered with bitterness?" "No." Ebed Melech pointed to the river. "Then share it. Not because you have to, but because God shared mercy with you when you didn't deserve it." The men exchanged glances, then nodded. Problem solved. Not with force, but with truth. Later that week, a boy wandered into the edge of the camp, lost. No shoes, no food. Just a tattered cloth wrapped around his shoulders. Ebed Melech found him under a fig tree. The boy tried to run. "Wait," Ebed Melech called gently. "I won't hurt you." The boy froze. Ebed Melech knelt, held out a piece of bread and said, "Here. You look hungry." The boy took it and devoured it in seconds. "What's your name?" Ebed Melech asked. The boy looked up. "Doesn't matter. My parents are gone." Ebed Melech sat beside him. "Then you can sit with me until you remember you belong." He handed him his own cloak, and that night they ate dinner together around the fire. Soon, people started calling on Ebed Melech for help, to settle disputes, to guide prayers, to comfort the dying, to feed the orphan. He never wore a title. He never asked for followers, but hearts began to turn toward him like plants stretched toward sunlight. And what amazed the people most was this. He never tried to impress them. He didn't give long speeches. He didn't demand respect. He just walked among them with peace in his eyes and kindness in his hands. One afternoon, Jeremiah sat beside him under a palm tree. The prophet's face was more weathered now, his eyes softer. "You've become a shepherd," Jeremiah said. Ebed Melech smiled. "I didn't try to. That's exactly why it happened." Jeremiah reached into his robe and pulled out a small scroll. "The Lord told me to give this to you," he said. Ebed Melech took it slowly, fingers trembling as he unrolled the parchment. It read, "Ebed Melech, my servant, because you trusted me, I will rescue you from harm. You will not fall by the sword. You will escape with your life, because you have put your trust in me." Ebed Melech stared at the words for a long time, then looked up. "But I've already been saved," he whispered. Jeremiah smiled. "He's not done saving you." That night, Ebed Melech didn't sleep. He sat by the fire, watching the stars blink into view one by one. Above him, silence. But not the empty kind, the full kind. The kind that says, "Well done." He pressed the scroll to his chest and breathed deeply. And for the first time since the kingdom fell, he didn't wonder who he was anymore. He knew. He was not a crown, Not a sword, not a servant. He was a man who trusted God, and that was more than enough. Morning came like a slow breath across the valley. Ebed Melech stirred from the mat he had laid beneath a fig tree. The fire had long since burned down to ash, but the coals were still warm. He stretched, stood, and looked out over the camp. Tents made from patched linen rustled in the breeze. Children ran barefoot across the dirt. Women pounded grain. Men carried wood. Life had returned. Not the same as it once was, not royal or rich, but real. And in the middle of it, unnoticed by many, was the man who had helped rebuild not with bricks, but with hope. As the sun climbed higher, a group of villagers approached him. A dispute had broken out over land again. Old boundary lines, now meaningless, still caused tension. Ebed Melech didn't raise his voice. He listened, asked questions, and then, with a finger in the dirt, he drew a new line. "Let mercy decide this," he said, "not memory. Mercy." The people agreed, not because he forced them, but because they trusted him. Later that day, a woman approached weeping. Her husband had died in the journey from Jerusalem. She clutched a bundle of cloth in her arms, a newborn child swaddled tightly. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "He has no name, no one to claim him." Ebed Melech took the baby gently in his arms. He looked into the child's wide, curious eyes and said, "Then let him be claimed by God." He handed the child back and smiled. "Call him Yechiel, God will live, because he still does, even here." The woman nodded, tears now mixed with peace. That evening, Jeremiah came walking slowly up the hill where Ebed Melech often sat to pray. He carried a satchel over one shoulder and a staff in hand. "The Babylonian general has allowed some of us to return north," Jeremiah said, "to settle near Mizpah. They've chosen a governor." Ebed Melech nodded. "You'll go?" "I must. God has work for me still." Jeremiah looked out over the scattered tents. "And you?" Ebed Melech looked around at the children playing near the river, at the old man tending vines, at the woman singing over her cooking fire. "I'm already where I'm needed." Jeremiah smiled. "There's something I've never told you," the prophet said. "When I was in that pit, half buried in mud, I thought I would die. I prayed, but my hope was fading. Then I heard your voice." Ebed Melech looked down, quiet. Jeremiah placed a hand on his shoulder. "That voice was my rescue, and God never forgot it." That night, Ebed Melech sat alone under the stars. He opened the scroll Jeremiah had once given him, the promise from the Lord. The words were faded now, the edges curled, but the message still burned bright. "Because you trusted me, you will escape. You will not fall by the sword. Your life will be your reward." He read it aloud to the wind, not because he doubted it, but because he believed it even more now. Not one piece of it had failed. He had survived the fall of a kingdom, rescued a prophet, found peace in the wilderness, and built something holy with his bare hands and a faithful heart. In the days that followed, more travelers came, some with broken carts, some with broken spirits, all looking for a place to begin again, and each time they asked, "Who leads here?" The people simply pointed to a man kneeling by the garden, trimming vines with care. "That's Ebed Melech," they said. "The servant?" "No," someone always corrected. "The one who served when it mattered most." Epilogue. He was never crowned, never rich, never remembered in the records of kings, but God wrote his name down, Ebed Melech, the man who trusted, the man who rescued, the man who remained. And generations later, his story is still whispered through Scripture as a reminder. You don't have to be loud to be faithful. You don't have to be famous to be seen. Because when the kingdoms fall, God remembers those who stood when everyone else stayed silent, and he never forgets a servant who trusted him.